I welcome you to this very, very important panel. Before we start, I want to make sure that everybody knows that we are right now live streaming this event, and we're going to have a few people joining us and watching via the live stream. I want to extend my warm welcome to all of you today here as we gather to explore a critical topic in our community, Afro-Latinidad. Thank you for being here to engage in this important conversation. And as you all know, Afro-Latinidad embodies a rich tapestry of cultures, histories, identities, woven into together by shared experiences, resilience, struggle, and triumph. Today we stand on the shoulders of generations who have fought against racism, colonialism, and marginalization. Understanding this shared history is essential to sharing our collective future. The struggles faced by Afro-Latinos and African Americans are often interconnected, deeply rooted in systemic inequalities that affect both communities. Today, we're in for a real treat as we join by some of our nation's leading academics, policymakers, and civil rights activists who will lead a two-part panel conversation around the shared history and the destiny of Afro-Latinx and African Americans, Black Americans. They offer us a roadmap for a shared national Latino Black advocacy agenda. We hope that our panel, Shared History, Shared Agenda, serves as a vital platform to highlight our intersectionality and to recognize that our fight for social justice, equality, and empowerment must be united. I invite each of you to actively engage in the conversation today. Consider how you can contribute to a shared agenda, whether through advocacy, education, or community engagement. Our success depends on our collective effort and unwavering commitment by one another. By standing together, we can assert our narratives, celebrate our identities, and shape the future direction of this country. And now is an enormous pleasure for me to introduce someone that has many, many different roles. She's the president of the Creative Justice Initiative, founder of the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, co-founder of Corredor Afro Project, and of course, the vision behind this project and the many conversations happening around the country around Latinidad, a true leader, a true visionary. Please welcome Dr. Marta Moreno Vega.
Thank you for being here. This panel is part of a series, as Frank said, that is happening across the country, focused on Afro-Latinos and focused on the fact that as African descendants, we're Black, right? And for many, because of the construct of colonization, we've been framed in a way that we are different from other Africans. We are one. We came from the same place, distributed throughout the world, and now we're together again. So that shared history has been continuous. Those conversations have been continuous, and our panel will address that. But let us be clear that Latinidad often erases the Native and African traditions and peoples that we are. And in that three-race kind of structure, the African descendant history gets erased. We will not be erased. The largest population of Africans were torn out of West Africa into what is now the Americas. So we understand we're Black, and we hope that you share with us in this discussion understanding that going forward, we've always had a joint agenda. We have it now with intentional purpose to save our liberty, and save democracy.
That's right.
Yeah. Bendición.
She didn't introduce you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Irizarry Mattei. I am the president of the board of the Creative Justice Initiative. I want to thank Malta Morena Vega. I want to thank Frankie and the Hispanic Federation for partnering with us on this, and all of the partners and many people who have contributed to us being here today. It's a great honor to be here. I want to also thank the panelists who are here, our esteemed panelists, and introduce them. To my left, I have Dr. George Chinea, who is professor and director of the Center of Latino and Latin American Studies at Wayne State University in Detroit. To his left, I have Esmeralda Simmons. She's an attorney and founder and longtime director of the Center for Law and Social Policy at Medgar Evers College at the City University of New York. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Yasmyn Irizarry. She is Associate Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. So please, welcome them all. And I just want to thank you for being a part of this important conversation. And I just kind of wanted to start with an overview and a foundation. And it seems like a simple question, but it's a loaded question. And I'm gonna toss it to Jorge, but also, you all can chime in as needed. But how do you define Afro-Latino, and why is that definition absolutamente negro?
Well, in basic terms, right, we could say that Afro-Latino is really a term used to identify, validate, recognize, legitimate the presence of Africans and Blacks in the culture and the societies of Latin America and in the Hispanic world within the United States, the Hispanic Latino world. When I think about Afro-Latinidad, I think about a couple of different things, but let me preface it by mentioning something that happened in my youth, my growing up. I asked my mother a long time ago, tell me a little bit about her father. And she said that my father, Máximo Serrano, he enjoyed dancing in different communities when he was young and while he was raising her. And I said, what kind of dances did Máximo do? She said, well, they would go to the houses, they would get into the second floor, they had a wooden floor, they would start hitting the floor with their feet, con los zapatos. She said it was thunderous, it was loud. I always thought that at any one moment, the floor was going to give in and people were going to fall right through the floor and end up in the floor. I said, Mom, what do they call that dance? I never heard of it. I mean, I heard bomba y plena, aguinaldo, salsa, merengue, bachata. Where is this thing? She said it was called garabato. Oh. So I studied garabato a little bit, trying to find out what it meant. And it really was a part of the influence of the flamenco music in Spain. Then when you go back to the flamenco music in Spain, you learn that the flamenco music in Spain came from two different sources, primarily from India, right, and from Northern Africa.
Morocco.
And so you have this influence in the culture that predates the development of Afro-Latinidad in the Americas, right? So Afro-Latinidad really began in two places. In Spain, for the portion that pertains to us here as people who came from Latin America that were colonized by Spain and Portugal, but also in Africa, because the Portuguese and the Spaniards began colonizing those areas. The Portuguese in particular, they brought in Roman Catholicism to places like Angola, the Congo, and Mozambique. And the people who came from those areas were already infused with some of the ideas of that religion, and they blended in with native forms of religion in Africa. And so Afro-Latinidad has a very long legacy, a long, path, and it behooves us to understand that path and to embrace it And so that's what I have been doing as a professor, also as an individual interested in curious about Afro-Latinidad. Spain was under the Islamic influence for 800 years. And a lot of
The Moors.
yes, the Moor, and a lot of the culture that they brought in the architecture, the arts, and the sciences, but they also brought in languages, food that we eat, clothing, and terminology that we use. When I think about Puerto Rico and people say, you know, el alcalde va a hablar, the mayor is going to be talking, alcaide really is a term from the Arabic. It's called al-Qaidi. The same thing with alguacil, which is like a sheriff or local police enforcement person. Alguacil is another Arabic term. So we have tons of words that come from the Arabic and nuances in those words that remind us of the influence of Northern Africa in the culture of Spain. And then we had the influence that occurred, and this is the one that we're most familiar with, which is slave trade. The slave trade brought in 12...
Before you go there, please mention the fact that those Arabic, Islamic people were Africans.
Absolutely.
From not just Northern Africa, but from Northwest Africa as well, all the way down to the Sudan.
Absolutely.
So it was not just Islamic people going to conquer Europe. It was Africans with Hannibal going to conquer Europe.
That's and so you have thank you for adding that. That's beautiful. And so you have then the influx of about 12.5 million people that came to the Americas involuntarily, right? They were essentially dehumanized and sold off as piezas de Indias or pieces of the Indies. And Africans had to come to terms with that reality. And part of the way they did this was to undergo cleansing rituals in the Americas to try to remove the curse of enslavement. And from that, those ceremonies that were being taking place, we had candomblé, we got santeria, and we have a lot of other African-derived religious beliefs that emerged and thrived in the Americas. And you can even say the spirituals in the South were part of that. And so what you have then is that the New World became Africanized. You know, by about the middle of the 19th century, the Americas was an extension of Africa, immigration-wise, rather than an extension of Europe. And a lot of us keep referring to Europe as the motherland. We should be looking at the other way. The motherland is in the other direction, on the other side of the Atlantic. And so when you look at the influence of that in the United States, it was rather minimal. We have a slide on that. If someone could perhaps show that, the slide of the African slave trade.
Number 3.
Is it number 3?
Do we have it on?
It's number 3.
Is there? Yes. And you can see there that essentially, by the way, when I say 12.5 million people, those are the people that landed in the Americas. The people that were taken, you had to add a percentage of about 30% to that. So that now we're talking close to 20, 25 million. But those who arrive mostly in South America and the Caribbean. The United States received, on the next slide, if you had that, only about 3% of the enslaved Africans who came to the Americas. But the United States also received additional Africans through regional channels. That is, people that were being procured in the West Indies, in Cuba, Jamaica, Barbados, and so on, and then sent to the norte, no? To the north. In addition, when the United States expanded in the course of the 19th century, they integrated Louisiana. They integrated the so-called Mexican section, which is really half of Mexico's territory. the integrated Florida. And in those areas, there was plenty of people of Black ancestry that were integrated into the culture of the United States, and that's where we have a lot of the Latin jazz, right? That came into the picture. So the influence of Afro-Latinidad is extensive, is wide-ranging, is profound, and we need to look at that. And with that, I close so that I can give somebody else a chance to add more to that.
Thank you, Jorge. Does anybody want to add to this idea of defining Afro-Latinidad and how it is absolutamente negro?
If I could just add to this, I think that absolutamente negro is an important part of this because with a history, and we can talk a little bit about that, I think, in a bit of mestizaje, and narratives of mixedness that exist in Latin America have been carried through generations of immigrants to the United States. We have stories of ancestry, but that's different than actually speaking of an experience of Blackness and of Black people. And so Afro-Latinidad and tying it to this absolutamente negro is speaking to not just a story of a history of pictures 500 years ago and an imaginary of people who traveled and a story of a great-grandmother. It's an experience of Blackness in the present. It's an ongoing experience of Blackness. And it's an ongoing experience of Blackness in lived experience, in oppression, in migration, in family, in joy, in all these things. And so that's an important part because we are so, I think, moving so much into a moment of identity that we forget that in that is part of a story, but that is not a whole story. And here, the tying feature is both the history and an ongoing experience and connection that's tied to being absolutamente negra.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask Esmeralda. This panel is called Shared Histories, Shared Agendas. Can you talk a little bit about that shared history and experiences that Yasmyn was alluding to and talk a little bit more about those experiences and histories that connect Afro-descendant communities in the U.S. and in the Americas?
Well, I'm just pick up from where Jorge left off.
Okay.
Because he covered very, very much of the original part of it, so I don't need to repeat that. But understand that this Latin movement, this Black movement, this Afro-American movement, that's mythical. There was one movement for freedom. We were all enslaved or under the foot, the heel of the colonizers and some of the masters. So we were working together whenever we were. We did not see a distinction. Understand that this distinction, again, is a tool of divide and conquer. Language is, no disrespect, but English is not my people's language. Portuguese is not anybody's from Africa's original language. Neither is Spanish. No disrespect, because obviously we have the right to speak whatever languages that ties us together. But let's not pretend that that's how we started out as a people. So all of that is to say is that we were working together. Now, some examples. We don't have to go, we can, but we don't have to go all the way back to pre the United States, the colonies. But let's at least realize that even as far back as the colonial wars, 1812, the War of 1812, and I hope you remember what that's about, because we were fighting with our Latin brothers and sisters, with the British, some with the Spanish, some with the French, to make sure that the United States, which was then a country, a self-declared country, I hope I say that right, self-declared nation. And if you didn't get that, that means that we can once again declare what this nation is. And if you don't understand that this struggle we were raging was because we were the majority population in this country. By 1850, we were the majority people here. Not in control, but it was us. So every time there was a revolt, we were in those revolts together. There were Latins in the Maroons. There were Latins fleeing with Harriet Tubman. There were all of the black people were fleeing together. And if somebody happened to worship Islam, if somebody happened to speak Spanish, or whatever they could remember of it, they were not included. All were welcome to escape. And we helped each other. But, I said I was going to mention his name, and I will. Let us not forget that we fast forward to the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement. I'm not passing over everything that happened. Forgive me for not going into Arturo Schomburg. Remember, these are people that caused us to be who we are. I would not be the student of John Henry Clark were it not for Arturo Schomburg. He studied with him. It passed down to me. But who was marching in the front line of the Civil Rights March? Cesar Chavez. Oh, how surprising. Why is he there? Because it's one movement. And I'm just going to go by my personal history. There's a reason I'm on this panel. And there are some New Yorkers here. There are some New Yorkers here, and I don't have to tell them about what I have been accused of and guilty of and very, very proud of. But, yes, I was one of those students of the black and Puerto Rican students that took over Hunter College and then created the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department.
I think it's appropriate that I should mention that my sister was one of the first students in that program.
Oh, what's her name? What's her name?
Nilda Chinea.
Yes?
Yeah.
No. See, that's when you always got to do good because you never know who you're running into. I knew Nilda. I was one of the first majors too. You don't start a department and not majoring. Anyway, a few years later, some pesky Puerto Ricans decided that we need to do more than have the Schomburg Library. We need to have a study center. And I was a student leader sitting on the P&B committee. I don't want to get into all this nonsense. But all you need to know is we were the ones that decided, yes, let's put in for creating a center for Puerto Rican studies. So this lonely student, I should say lowly student, and all of these big-time faculty members petitioned the school, and the school said no, and then I said, don't worry about it. The students then petitioned the school, and after they got beat up from the strike, they were, okay, fine. You want a center? No problem. It just has to raise its own money. That was easy to raise the money because by then there were Puerto Rican legislators, there were Puerto Rican people in Congress, and the money was raised. And I'm not putting aside any other people that have been so generous to the Centro. And Centro is the largest collection of Puerto Rican artifacts, studies, papers, and people are still going to that lowly room in the Hunter College building to study at El Centro. And that's something to be proud of. But that's one thing. Going on. In law school, I went to law school at Brooklyn Law School. There was no Latino student union. So of course, the Black Student Union welcomed all the Latinos in. Hey, you're with us. And it was, and they said, well, some of them didn't identify as Black. I said, it's all right. Come on in. We have to take care of each other. We are one people. We have to take care of each other. And later on, there was it was called Latino Law Students Association. And the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund had a lot to do with helping that come to bear. But just to want you to know that we have been together forever. The division is manufactured. manufactured. Moving along, and this personal history. From 1979 to 1983, myself, Juan Cartagena, I praise his name. We were co-counsel on at least half a dozen major, I'm talking about Supreme Court civil rights cases on voting rights. And I was what, 2 years out of law school, he was 3 years out of law school. We were taking cases to the Supreme Court and beating the pants off of the city government and the state government because they were not doing right by us in terms of voting rights. And we were using Section 5 and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to make sure that equal protection and fair districts. I hope you heard the word fair. That means one does not take advantage of another. I'm also happy to say I work with Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, which was at Puerto Rico Legal Defense Fund. I work with Angelo Falcone Institute, again, praise his name, Institute for Latino Policy, and I'm leaving out dozens of other folks that I work with from the Institute as well as the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, now Latino Justice, over the years. And then we did something unprecedented that made national news. We created a group of voting rights attorneys of color that represented our constituent populations in New York State. And we put together a unity map with Asians so that they could not divide and conquer us and one group is getting more than they deserve. We put together a fair map. You know how hard that was? And how many of our own people said, no, no, no. I want this area, you're giving it to them, but fair is fair. So I'm gonna stop there. I have some more to talk about in terms of what we have done together. When you're willing to show, my husband said I should say these two words, and I'm sincere in saying them. Respect and earned trust. Earned trust. I am proud to sit on the board of the Creative Justice Institute. I'm proud to sit on Elizabeth Jean-Pierre's board in terms of doing climate justice and uprose. These are Latinas whom I love and adore as sisters and as amazing visionaries. If you don't know about them, please know that you have giants moving amongst you. Honor them, respect them. For me, I'm just their sister.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could just add a little bit about this shared history, it's really important to think about the fact that when we're saying shared history, we're not saying shared and separate. It is actually shared. There are, I believe one of the Tuskegee Airmen was Afro-Latino.
Yes.
Even thinking about international conversations during the late 1800s in the fight against eugenics, the conversation was international. One of the first people to respond was Antonio Fermin, who was an anthropologist from Haiti. In conversation later with who? Du Bois. Right? So even Black political thought and its development in the US was not just a national conversation, but an international one that included voices from Latin America and from Black people who were also battling anti-Blackness, battling coloniality, battling white supremacy, and in conversation and collectively working towards those goals. And so it's important to think about, in thinking about this shared history, understanding that that shared history isn't just a separate, but actually a collective one. Having left New Jersey, where a lot of my early understandings of that were in New York, New Jersey, and then having since lived in Ohio and Indiana, Mississippi, now in Texas, where I have people talking about the experiences of Black civil rights in Texas and Afro-Latinos in Texas, what it means to be, I have a postdoctoral fellow who is Afro-Panamanian in San Antonio. Whoa. Right? These are different kinds of experiences, and speaking about what it means to think about that history. Also, history of migration. For example, there are communities on the coast in Mexico who celebrate Juneteenth. Why? That's right. Because the railroad wasn't just north, it was also south. And our migration was not just into the U.S., but also out. There was a community in the Dominican Republic, in the northern part, in Samaná. There was actually a community taken there by their pastor of the AME church that was in Philadelphia seeking freedom in the 1800s. We have a student in Black Studies at Texas who was helping them trying to archive their original documents from the 1800s. Because they are descendants of people enslaved in the United States who now have their own accent community and still sing their hymns at their AME church in English. Even though all their children speak Spanish. It was a very interesting New York Times article about this several years ago. So these shared histories, it's an ongoing history, and a shared history that is national, international, in, out, and ongoing even now, and national across the country: California, Texas, Chicago, New York. And there are different ways that is manifested, but all of them include a long history of Afro-Latinx people, Black people, being part of and actively engaging in movements towards liberation.
Right.
Wonderful, thank you. Wow, so I want to follow up on what you were talking about, but I just want to, in the spirit of sharing personal connections, you were talking about Brooklyn Law School, so I just want to say that's my alma mater, and I was a member of both the Black and the Latino Student Union, so thank you, Esmeralda.
The tradition continues.
That's right, that's right. So we were talking about all these shared histories, shared connections, shared experiences, shared culture, all this sharing. So in light of that, why is a panel like this important? Why is this conversation important? What are some of the historical or structural factors that necessitate this conversation?
I'm hot to talk about it.
Okay, please do.
First, understand that there is a fictitious thing called the census. And even the census agrees that of the total U.S. population of 345 million people, they claim the Latin population is 19.4%, and of that 12% are Afro-Latin. So you know that that's really skewed, and we're going to have to deal with that. How they force people to choose and decide and deny. Of that population, of the U.S. population, they have Afro-Caribbean, that's only new for the last 10 years, for the last 4 years, and I love this, I'm one of them, only 0.8%. That's ludicrous. African-American as 12.6%. And they've separated those two out. And they've also separated African, continental African out as well. So they're going to continue to separate in order to separate us. And the reason why we're here is because we have a shared agenda. The folks who want us to be under the heel again, or simply want to be on top, they don't care who's under them, are very alarmed that in less than 12 years, they will have to admit that we are the majority population of the United States. All of this brouhaha is about the fact that if democracy is a democracy and we are the majority, we should rule. They don't want that. So therefore, they have to have all kind of mechanisms to eliminate that possibility of a shared agenda of people of color, majority Latin, followed by African Americans, followed by Asians, followed by browns, now called Middle Easterns. That will be the majority population. Some of those folks may want to align with white folks, that's fine, they can go with whoever they want to. But the rest of us are designed at this point to continue to be suppressed to the least. Therefore, all kinds of voting mechanisms are going to have to be changed so we can't vote. You know, everything has to be shut down. They will challenge you. They will challenge whether you're a citizen. They will challenge whether or not you have a chance to vote. They will challenge immigration, opening up immigration and legalizing folks that have been here for decades. They will challenge everything. They will not let people of color in the country while they welcome Europeans, because they do not want that shift to occur. And they are presuming, and this should make us quake, that we are organizing together. Let's make that reality.
Yes,
So I'm very glad that you brought up these numbers, because in preparation for this, I did a little homework, did a little research, tried to get my finger on what these numbers are, and it was not easy.
Oh, I asked an expert.
Yes, yes. No. So the census, the last U.S. Census 2020, counts the people who said both Black and Latino at 3.9 million. The last Pew Research Center report estimates that number is actually of Afro-Latino, Latinx peoples to be 6 million. And every subsequent study that I looked at was a different, wildly different number. And so we have the fortune of having Yasmyn on this panel who does so much work in this area. And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about why it's so difficult to get a handle on the numbers, and also why aggregation, or more importantly, disaggregation of those numbers is important to the conversation.
Well, I guess to start, part of the reason it's hard to get to those numbers is because we have created a system that has positioned Latinx, Latino, Latinx, Latinidad as a racial category, as a collective that I guess in some ways is perceived as homogenous. I mean, I think about the history of like looking at Univision and telenovelas, and everybody looks the same except nobody looks like me, right, or any of my family, and then juxtaposition that, right? And so when you are trying to measure a group, it's hard to measure them when we say you are two of, because you can't split people in half, right? How are you that and that? They go, how are you that and that? Is it that your mother is this and your father is this? Is it that this is this? Like, you can cut somebody. Because the history and the coloniality has also tried to erase Blackness from Latinidad, and in doing that, erase Black people from Latinos. And what that has done is made it so that it's difficult to actually measure that. It's made it difficult to measure it. And what that does is that leads to erasure. Because you are supposed to be one or the other. You can't be both. How can you be Black and Latino? How is that possible? If Latino is who I see in the telenovela, and if Black is not Latino, how can you be both? How can you speak Spanish and be Black? Where'd you learn it? Wow, how'd you learn it so well? Your accent is so good. Which parent? Which school? Right? And so these very notions, and these notions are built in through narratives of Latinidad as tied to Spain, this whitening, this constant push to whiten Latinidad, this constant presentation of Latinidad through whiteness and through the lens of whiteness, anti-Blackness among Latinos. And then that is the underlying ideology that drives all our measurement. You think the people that measure have somehow reckoned with that before they start counting or thinking about how to count and who to count and why and in what ways? And so when we then start counting, how do we count people? Which boxes do they check? And if they check them, where do they get counted? and which category they are part of. And if those categories are supposed to be separate, can they be both? And if they're both, are they now multiracial? Oh, there's the new thing, right? Are they now multiracial? People go, oh, so you're Black and Latino? Okay, so you're multiracial. You're Black and what? I go Black and Black. They're waiting for the non-Black parent because they're assuming the Black parent isn't Latino. Because that separation in people's imaginaries is so powerful that they just literally cannot fathom Black people in Latin America, Black people speaking Spanish, Black people being Latino in the United States, like, and anywhere. Like, they just can't, even though the majority of Black people who were stolen from West Africa and brought to the Americas were taken to Latin America.
Right.
Right? And that's how powerful ideology is. But ideology shapes our measurement. And so when we think about why we can't get it right, why we can't get a number, well, who is actually Afro-Latino? What do people think that even means? What are we measuring and how are we measuring it? And then when we do that, what category do they fall in? It depends on who you ask. If you are asking Pew, the question is only asked to people who say they're Latino. So you have to say you're Latino first in order to actually then get the question Afro-Latino. And there are a lot of Afro-Latinos who actually don't identify as Latino. There's an interesting fact a lot of people don't know. So in Pew, you only get it if you're Latino first. Then you'll get the Afro-Latino question. But then when they say Afro-Latino, who would answer? I don't know. Maybe people who are Black, absolutamente negro, but also somebody who saw a picture of a great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, somebody who took a 23andMe. I don't know, right? I don't know. And then if we ask the census who they're talking about, they'll say it's a person who checked Black, and it's a person that checked Latino, maybe. And that might be one way they'll do it, right? Except that in Latin America, Black is denigrated in many countries in such a way that many people don't check it, not even because they don't see themselves as connected to Africa, but the word itself is denigrated in such a way that even laying claim to that as an identity is a struggle, which is why in first generation, so many first generation Black Latinos opt out of race questions. So my research shows that by third generation, they don't, but in the first generation in the US, they do opt out because of that denigration of literally the term negro, the term Black, right? So who actually is checking Black? And the census won't mark you as Black if you say you are Dominican, but they'll mark you as Black if you say you're Haitian. But it's the same island. Are they waiting to see which side of the river you came from? You know, like, are you from Bokbanik or are you from Bocabanica? Like somehow there's a big difference between the people on each side of that river, right? And so the very nature of measurement becomes an issue, right? And so there's that part of it. And then there's the part of, okay, when we measure, if you can't be both and, or if you are, then when we count you, where do we count you and how do we count you? Especially now in a moment where we are talking about rights for Latinos and rights for Black people. Now, where do we count? Do we cut you in half and half your rights count for voting rights for Black people and half your rights count for voting rights for Latinos? Do you get to count twice? Do you get to count once for Black, for your Black, and once for your Latino? Or do you get to not count as all as Black, like the Office of Management and Budget has decided for employment and for education? Black Latinos don't count as Black at all. We are Latino regardless of race. We have no choice in that matter. And when you see statistics from the civil rights data collection on disparities in education, on discipline, on paddling, on other things, we are literally erased. We don't exist. We're in the Latino regardless of race category. If the school's all Latino, there is no racism because we're just all Latino. Because how could you be Latino and also anything else? So to your question of disaggregation, it's important The question is, with our data, is it possible? A lot of the ways we collect it makes it impossible to disaggregate. I cannot tell you in a school that is just Latino students whether Black Latino students are being suspended and arrested at higher rates, or being blocked from calculus at higher rates, or being mistreated in particular ways. I just can't do it. I can't even find them in the data. They don't exist.
Wow, okay.
And that's erasure. And that's why it matters.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Jorge, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I don't doubt that these manipulations have an ulterior motive, right? But I also go back historically to see where these patterns started. When you go back to Spain, remember that I was talking about the Muslim presence in Spain, 800 years. During that particular timeline, the Moros and the Cristianos were getting along. The Cristianos were learning about Muslim ways, and the Muslims were learning Christian ways. They were changing clothes, they were eating different foods, they were talking together. When the Christian Crusades began in Spain, La Reconquista, that's when you begin to see in writing a lot of negative connotations about Blackness, about Muslims, about Islam. It was important to the Christians to denigrate and to animalize and to put down the Moros if you are to conquer them. And when the Spaniards arrived in the New World, unfortunately, those same notions of Blackness that were already rehearsed in Spain were transplanted to the Americas. That also connects with counting in some interesting ways. When in Puerto Rico, in the very early part of the 16th century, the Spanish conquest resulted in the decimation of the Indian population, not everybody really died away. What really happened was some people fled into the mountains. Cimarrones, right? Maroons. These are the predecessors of the African Maroons that will follow later on. The Europeans who needed the Indians to work for them had no choice but to write to the Spaniards in Spain, right, to the king and queen, and say, the king and queen would say, well, why can't you just use Indians? There are no Indians. They became extinguished. They vanished. They're not here. They're gone. We need Africans. They were Indians, right? But not the Indians that they wanted, because these Indians were resisting enslavement, and therefore they were not useful to them. So they use another trick. They reclassify Indians as mestizos. Now, there are no Indians, they are mestizos. See, we need to enslave Indians, but they're none. When you keep mestizos into the picture, now you have two labor force. The Indians, now mestizos, that you can enslave because they're not Indians, because Indian enslavement was already outlawed, right? So if you relabel them mestizos, you can enslave them. But you don't have to tell the Spanish that. You could just tell the Spanish that you need Africans. So this manipulation of numbers is something that is it has a very colonial heritage. This is something that we must get rid of, right? If we are to follow through on what we're saying here, part of that is to cast out this colonial mentality that continues to inform the way we look at people, the way we count them, and the way we label them.
So I think we're coming to a close in our conversation, and thank you for the three of you. But I think I want to leave the audience with some takeaways here. We talked about a shared history. We talked about shared experiences. We talked about the need to disaggregate and not be subsumed into one group or another and be a part of systematic structural erasure. And we talked about some of the challenges, the common challenges, whether someone mentioned the evolving immigration. We talked about existing in Black bodies. But what I want to kind of just do a quick round robin and go across is to talk about some of the ways that these unique challenges, unique to Afro-Latinos, Latinx populations, how those things can be addressed, reimagined, rethought about to address some of the things that you identified as unique challenges and unique solutions for those issues with regards to Afro-Latinos.
From my perspective, as a historian, what really gets me and bothers me is that we sometimes homogenize Latinos in Latin America. You know, we fail to distinguish between different subgroups within that family of people. The conditions of people of African descent in Latin America replicate in many ways what happens here with people of African descent in the United States. By failing to recognize that difference, we might not be putting into place whatever measures are necessary to correct that and create equality or at least equity, or at least remove some of those disadvantages, right? Some of those disabilities. And at the moment, we're not doing that. You know, we have a sizable Black population in Colombia, in Cuba, in Santo Domingo, in Panama, in Puerto Limón, Costa Rica, in places in Mexico from Guerrero to Acapulco. We have them in the northern borderlands. We have them all throughout, even Haiti. Haiti needs to be included in that picture, and the reason why is because Spanish America would not have been free without the Haitian support, right? It was Haiti who said, here's the money, and he has some soldiers, Simon Bolivar, right? And when you get there and you do your job, I want you to free the slaves. And if you can't do that, don't come back for more money. We're not going to give it to you. And it took 20, 30, 40 years for each liberated territory to actually liberate the slaves. That's a shame. And so we need to look at those inequalities that are already embedded in Latin America when we think about immigration reform and look for ways to include the element of race and racial politics into that equation.
Thank you, thank you. Esmeralda.
As I said before, the real issue before us is how we can go forward together with a shared agenda. Not an agenda that's been thrust upon us, but an agenda that we identify. Our priorities, our shared priorities. The one that obviously pops up to mind is immigration. But I want you to know that we have just as much issues in healthcare, in education, in taking care of our elders. I'm ashamed to be in this country with the way they treat elderly people. The fact that they have to stand on food lines, and we call ourselves people of color, Africans, we call ourselves Black, and our people are standing on food lines. So there are many, many issues that we need to take up together, but we also have to understand that it is a broader issue about how we will be governed. How we will be governed. And that issue can only be done in coalition. If you don't remember anything else today, go out of here with the word trust, respect, and coalition. The only way forward is together.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to leave the last 30 seconds for Yasmyn.
Okay. So Hansel Owan recently had a report that covered one of the responses from, I believe it was Louisiana, to the jurisdiction, the case they had. And one of the responses they sent to the Supreme Court was to reclassify who counted as Black, to limit it to just people who were Black alone or Black and white. That would exclude Black indigenous folks, Black Latinos, and then with the new categorization, Black North Africans, Black MENA, Black Melanesians. The question of Afro-Latinidad and Black Latinos and measurement and who counts is a question that is important for voting rights, for Black rights, and for Black collective power. And we need to have conversations about how that is being used and how that may be used as a way to challenge and to further, take away voting rights in places where we're already struggling, given what's happened with the Voting Rights Act. So that's one thing. The last thing I would just say is also understand that even among Black Latinos, there is immense diversity. And so it's important to understand there is important immigration and generational diversity, ethnic diversity, language diversity, and identity diversity, right? Because I see a lot of times people get caught up in memes about who people are, and that we need to remember that the diversity exists. It is a part of our history, and it's an important part of understanding how we get to liberation, is honoring that, understanding it, but also using it collectively towards that, right?
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jorge Chinea, Esmeralda Simmons, and Dr. Yasmyn Irizarry. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our distinguished panel. We are going to take a 2-minute break to mic our next set of speakers. This is also for the benefit of people that are seeing us right now in live stream. So 2-minute break, we reset, and we continue with our incredible distinguished panel. We will have Q&A at the end, so please stand by until we reset the stage. Thank you.
It fell off. I don't know how that